November 7th, 1849, Savannah, Georgia. The air was warm for autumn, thick with the smell of salt drifting in from the waterfront as crowds pressed into the public market. On the wooden auction block stood a young woman whose wrists were bound so tightly the rope had scraped her skin raw. She was 22 years old, 5 months pregnant, and the auctioneer's ledger listed her value at a price so insulting that even hardened slave brokers muttered in disbelief. 19 cents. Not $19, just 19 cents, less than a handful of coffee beans. Cyrus Feldman, the man charged with selling her, called out her details with the smooth cadence of someone who had recited thousands of such transactions. But something in his tone wavered. Something about this sale felt wrong even to men accustomed to witnessing human suffering. Spectators shifted uneasily, sensing there was more beneath the surface than the auctioneer was willing to say. And there was. The events that unfolded that morning would be whispered about for decades, covered up, denied, erased. What happened to this woman set off a chain of consequences that Savannah's elite would spend nearly a century trying to bury. Tonight, we bring those truths back into the light. Before the story spirals into its darkest corners, it is important to understand who stood on that platform. The woman had a name, though official papers recorded it twice, each time spelled differently. One document called her Dinah. A coroner's report years later called her Diana. But from the one moment in her life when she dared speak for herself, we know the name she used, Dinina. She was born on a rice plantation outside Charleston in 1827, the daughter of an enslaved woman named Patience. She never knew her father. Patience worked the fields until her back curved and her hands were permanently stained green by rice stalks. Overwork consumed her body long before old age could. She died when Dinina was 11. Her daughter, still a child herself, was sold days later to a Charleston tobacco merchant named Elias Cartwright, a man who managed to appear pious and respectable while hiding rot beneath the surface. In public he was a church deacon, a businessman, a husband and father. In private he was something else entirely, a man who believed the bodies of the enslaved were his to use as he pleased. For 3 years Dinina served inside the Cartwright home, cleaning, cooking, tending to children barely younger than she was. She moved silently through the rooms, learning the household rhythms, learning the expressions of those who held power over her, and she learned to fear the way Elias watched her. At first, it was the kind of lingering stare enslaved women knew too well, the type that warned danger was coming. But the day Dinina turned 14, his interest crossed the threshold from threat to action. What happened thereafter followed a pattern tragically common in the American South. Repeated assault sanctioned by a legal system that considered enslaved women incapable of refusing. A woman legally classed as property had no body in the eyes of the law, only utility. When Dinina's pregnancy became visible, Elias's wife, Constance, did not confront her husband. She confronted the girl. She accused Dinina of seducing a righteous man, of corrupting her household, of being the architect of her own violation. When the baby was born, a light-skinned girl named Ruth, whose features betrayed her father, Elias acknowledged nothing. He added Ruth to his ledger as offspring of servant, father unknown, then returned to his comfortable routines. Constance demanded the child be removed from her sight and banished Dinina to the servants' quarters, a cramped outbuilding barely fit to house animals. There, after 16-hour days, Dinina nursed Ruth by candlelight and whispered to her the lullabies her own mother once sang. Ruth grew into a bright, curious child, and with each passing year her resemblance to Elias became more impossible to ignore. Neighbors whispered. Constance seethed. And then one morning in 1847, while Dinina scrubbed pots in the kitchen, a sound shattered her world, her daughter screaming from the front of the house. By the time she reached the door, Ruth was already being carried away in the back of a trader's wagon. Elias had sold his own child for $400. He gave no explanation, offered no farewell, left no mercy. Dinina collapsed in the street, her grief so violent that other enslaved people had to lift her back inside. For 3 days she didn't speak, didn't eat, hardly breathed. She would have chosen death if it had come for her, but enslaved people seldom had the luxury of surrender. Survival was demanded. Slowly, painfully, she returned to work, returned to serving the man who had violated her and stolen her child. 2 years later, in the summer of 1849, she became pregnant again, this time with the child who would eventually lead her toward freedom and danger in equal measure. Constance erupted. A second pregnancy meant the truth of Elias's crimes could no longer be ignored, no longer hidden behind lies about seduction or temptation. She demanded the girl be removed from the household immediately. Elias understood the threat. Charleston society tolerated the rape of enslaved women so long as it remained discreet. If a wife dragged such sins into public view, a man's reputation could be damaged beyond repair. So Elias crafted a solution that was equal parts cruel and calculated. He arranged to have Dinina transported to Savannah by a business associate, William Hadley. In exchange for forgiving an $800 debt, Hadley agreed to purchase her and remove her from Charleston forever. Elias added one stipulation, a minimum price of 19 cents, not because she was sick, not because she was unable to work, but because humiliation was the final cruelty he wished to inflict. A pregnant, enslaved woman was usually valued at nearly $1,000, her unborn child representing future profit. By assigning her the price of pocket change, Elias sent a message only she could truly feel. You mean nothing. Your life has no worth, and whoever buys you will treat you accordingly. The arrangement was finalized. Papers were drawn, and Dinina, no belongings, no voice in her fate, was placed in a wagon and carried toward Savannah, toward an auction block where something entirely unexpected was waiting for her. The journey from Charleston to Savannah took 2 days. Dinina rode in the back of the wagon, wrists bound as a precaution, though there was nowhere she could possibly run, not while carrying a child, not in a landscape where any white passerby had the legal authority to question her presence. William Hadley traveled in relative comfort, unaware or uninterested in the fear gnawing at the woman he escorted. Savannah was larger than Charleston, louder, its port bustling with cargo ships that ferried cotton and rice to markets across the world. Enslaved people were traded here with mechanical regularity, their lives reduced to numbers on invoices. When Hadley delivered Dinina to the auction house, a dim wooden structure near the waterfront, she was examined by Cyrus Feldman, the auctioneer. His practiced hands assessed her age, her condition, and her pregnancy. But when Feldman saw the bill of sale specifying a minimum bid of 19 cents, his brows tightened. He asked Hadley what defect justified such a price. Was she ill, violent, unmanageable? Hadley offered only a clipped response. Personal matter, family dispute. Feldman understood immediately. Low prices often signaled trouble. Trouble buyers usually preferred to avoid. But Feldman cared more about preserving his own reputation than about Dinina's fate. He would not disguise the terms of the sale. Tomorrow morning, he declared, she would be offered exactly as the paperwork demanded. That night, Dinina was locked in a stone cell beneath the auction house. The space was damp and cold, designed less for comfort than containment. She sat against the wall, one hand resting against her abdomen, feeling faint movements from the child who had no idea of the danger waiting above. She thought of Ruth, her daughter, whose absence still hollowed her, and wondered whether this unborn child would share the same fate, born into a world where ownership determined worth. She slept little. At dawn, she was taken to the platform behind the building, where other enslaved people waited their turn to be priced and sold. By mid-morning, the crowd had grown large. Farmers, merchants, and curious onlookers gathered as if attending spectacle rather than suffering. Feldman's voice rose above the noise as he sold livestock, furniture, and then people. Each transaction met with murmurs of approval or boredom depending on the price. Dinina watched as a young man was purchased for $950, an elderly cook for $300. Then Feldman called her name. She stepped onto the platform, the sun hot on her shoulders, the weight of dozens of stares pressing against her. Feldman recited her description: female, 22, experienced in domestic work, pregnant, 5 months. Then the line that stunned the crowd: minimum bid, 19 cents. Voices erupted immediately. Buyers demanded to know what was wrong with her. Was she sick? Did she fight? Was she simple-minded? Feldman repeated Hadley's explanation, that the price reflected a personal matter between seller and property. But suspicion hung thick in the air. Human beings valued at pennies usually signaled disaster. Most potential bidders stepped away, yet 3 remained. William Hadley stood closest, prepared to place the required bid and complete his arrangement with Elias Cartwright. Behind him, a tall stranger lingered at the edge of the gathering, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. And to the left stood a man whose reputation preceded him, Thornton Graves, a plantation owner with a history soaked in cruelty. Graves ran his land like a battlefield. His workers were starved of rest and pushed beyond endurance, their lives calculated for maximum profit and minimal longevity. His presence alone darkened the morning. When Feldman called for the opening bid, Hadley raised his hand without hesitation. 19 cents. But before the auctioneer could nod, Graves's voice cut through the square. 25. The crowd turned, uneasy. Graves rarely attended auctions without reason. If he wanted a woman sold for pennies, it meant she fit a purpose no one dared question aloud. Hadley counted quickly. 50 cents. Graves smiled as though amused and raised to $1. The tension thickened. People drew closer. This was no ordinary sale anymore. Hadley clenched his jaw. He had agreed to acquire Dinina as part of a financial transaction, not a bidding war. But he pushed onward. $2. Again, Graves responded, louder this time. $5. A ripple of confusion passed through the crowd. Why bid aggressively on a woman supposedly worth pennies? What secret did these men know? Hadley hesitated, weighing his shrinking profits. Before he could speak again, the stranger at the back finally lifted his hand. $10. Silence fell. The man stepped forward, revealing a face hardened by experience, weathered skin, a scar along the cheek, and eyes that held an unsettling focus. Feldman demanded to know his identity as required. The man answered calmly, Jacob Marsh. He produced $10 silver without hesitation. Graves turned toward him with a stare sharp enough to cut. A stranger interfering in his interests. This was a challenge. And Graves was a man who never tolerated challenges. 15, he said coldly. Marsh returned. 20. Graves escalated. 30. Marsh matched with 40. Within minutes, the bidding climbed beyond any reasonable market value. 50. 100. 200. The crowd buzzed with disbelief as the number soared, each new bid pushing the limits of sense and pride. By the time Graves shouted $1,000, the auction had transformed into something else entirely. No longer a commercial exchange, but a duel of intent. No enslaved woman carrying a child had ever fetched such a price at this market. Hadley slipped away quietly, realizing his role in the arrangement had collapsed. When Marsh answered with $1,200, it became clear he was willing to go high as necessary. Graves understood. To continue would require sacrificing his pride or his fortune, and neither option appealed. He stepped back, face twisted with humiliation. Feldman called the final numbers with trembling disbelief. 1,200 once, 1,200 twice, sold to Jacob Marsh. But Dinina felt no relief. Her fate had simply passed into the hands of another unknown man. The crowd erupted into murmurs, trying to interpret what they had witnessed. Some believed Marsh had been seized by madness. Others suspected he knew something about the woman that made her unusually valuable. And still others wondered if he was intentionally provoking Graves, a dangerous idea for anyone who hoped to live long in Chatham County. As Marsh signed the deed of sale and Feldman prepared the paperwork, Graves watched from across the auction house. His expression was a storm brewing. A man like him didn't accept defeat, not in public, not ever. Whatever Jacob Marsh had done today, the consequences were coming, and they would not be small. Jacob Marsh led Dinina out of the auction house with quick, purposeful steps, not rough but urgent, as though he wanted as much distance as possible between them and the crowded square. She could feel eyes on her back, curious, judgmental, confused, and she knew one pair of eyes belonged to Thornton Graves, still simmering with humiliation. Marsh guided her through several busy streets before stopping at a modest wagon parked beneath a cluster of live oaks. He helped her climb into the back, then covered her with canvas so no passerby could see her condition. The horse jolted forward, and for a long time they traveled in silence. The city's noise faded behind them. Buildings gave way to forests. The rhythmic clatter of the wagon's wheels filled the air. Only when they reached a dirt road leading deep into the woods did Marsh finally speak. "My name is Jacob Marsh," he said, his voice even. "But you may call me sir if you wish. I will not harm you, I will not touch you, and I will not sell you." Dinina said nothing. Promises from men meant little. Marsh seemed to expect that response. "I know you don't trust me," he continued, "but your life, and your child's, depends on what happens next. So you must listen carefully." When she didn't respond, Marsh kept talking, navigating the wagon around a fallen tree. "Elias Cartwright did not send you here to start a new life," he said. "He sent you here to end it." The words struck like cold water. Dinina tensed beneath the canvas. Marsh continued. "He arranged the sale. He set the price. 19 cents was no accident. It was bait, meant to attract one kind of buyer." She knew instantly whom he meant. "Thornton Graves," she whispered. Marsh nodded. "Graves is known for buying women at insultingly low prices. Women who won't be missed. Women he can use up quickly." Dinina swallowed hard. Memories of the auction, Graves's smile, his aggressive bidding, cut through her mind like blades. "How do you know this?" she asked. Marsh reached into his coat and pulled out a folded slip of paper. Without looking back, he handed it to her beneath the canvas. "Read it." Her hands trembled as she opened the note. The handwriting was crooked but familiar. The message was short, urging her to trust Jacob Marsh, explaining that his intervention had been planned, that help was waiting. At the bottom was a small symbol, a bird with open wings. Her mother had taught her that symbol, a mark passed down through the women in her family, a signal, "You are not alone." "Bethy," Dinina whispered, recognizing the style. Marsh nodded. "She reached out months ago. She has been watching you for years, watching what Elias did, and watching Constance pretend she saw nothing. When she learned you were being sent here, she immediately contacted people who could help." Dinina stared at the paper, overwhelmed. Bethy had seemed so old, so harmless, practically invisible to white members of the household, but invisibility had made her powerful. Marsh continued, "I work with a network. People black and white who help enslaved men and women reach free states and Canada. You've heard the term before." "The Underground Railroad," Dinina said quietly. "Yes. Each person plays a part. Some provide shelter, some pass messages. Some, like me, travel under false names to intercept people in danger." Dinina breathed shakily. Everything she had believed about her fate was shifting. "Why me?" she asked. "Why would you risk so much for someone you have never met?" Marsh hesitated for the first time. "Because what Graves does is beyond cruelty," he said, "and because your life still has possibilities." As they traveled deeper into the forest, the road narrowed until it was barely more than a trail. The wagon bumped over roots and stones. Marsh slowed the horse and eventually turned onto an almost invisible path that disappeared between trees. Minutes later they entered a clearing where a small, weathered cabin stood, smoke drifting gently from its chimney. Before Marsh could knock, the door opened. A woman of about 50, with sharp eyes and a blue headscarf, stepped outside. When she saw Dinina climb from the wagon, her stern face softened. "You found her," the woman said. "I did," Marsh replied. "More trouble than expected. Graves was there." The woman, Sarah, pressed her lips together. "That man is poison," she muttered. "Did he see your face?" "He saw enough to ask questions," Marsh said. Sarah sighed heavily. "Then we have little time." She ushered them inside, where another woman, younger and mending fabric at a wooden table, looked up in surprise. "Lord, she's just a child," the younger woman murmured. "No," Sarah corrected gently, "she is a survivor." The cabin was warm, the air thick with the scent of beans and pork simmering over a fire. Sarah guided Dinina to the bed in the corner. "Rest first," she said. "We will speak when your strength returns." Dinina lay down, exhaustion overtaking fear, and sleep claimed her almost instantly. When she woke hours later, the room was dim. Sarah and the younger woman, Hannah, were talking quietly. Jacob Marsh was gone. Panic rose in her chest. "Where is he?" she asked. "He had to return to Savannah," Sarah explained. "He will be back tomorrow or the day after." Dinina ate the food they offered, her body grateful for warmth and nourishment. But unease lingered. "Why help me?" she asked. "Why hide me at such risk?" Hannah set down her sewing. Because there are people in this world who refuse to let evil go unanswered, she said softly. Sarah nodded. Your life matters, child, and your baby's life matters. We do this because it is right. Dinina believed them, and yet dread curled inside her. Something remained unspoken, something heavier than escape or rescue. Sarah exchanged a look with Hannah, then reached for a leather-bound journal sitting on a nearby shelf. She placed it on the table between them and opened to a marked page. You deserve to know why Elias Cartwright sent you here, she said quietly, and why Thornton Graves was waiting. Dinina braced herself as Sarah began to read. Sarah opened the journal to a page where the ink had browned with age. The handwriting belonged to a woman named Abigail, who had lived on Graves's plantation years earlier. Dinina leaned closer as Sarah read aloud. Abigail's first entry described the arrival of a pregnant woman named Rachel, bought cheaply, isolated from the others, taken each night to an old tobacco barn on the northern edge of the property. Her screams echoed after dark, but no one was permitted to approach. Weeks later, Abigail wrote that Rachel had died in childbirth, yet Abigail insisted she'd heard a newborn cry days after the supposed burial. Then silence. Then Rachel vanished entirely. No grave marker, no child, nothing but absences. Dinina's skin prickled. Sarah turned the page to another entry. Another woman, Margaret, purchased under similar circumstances, also pregnant, also secluded, also vanished. Each name carried the same pattern: acquisition, isolation, disappearance. Abigail knew something monstrous was happening, but she was powerless to stop it. Dinina felt her breath tighten as Sarah lowered the journal. Graves has been doing this for at least 10 years, she said, always purchasing women who are expecting, always keeping them apart, and always losing them with stories that never make sense. Hannah added quietly, some of the enslaved people on his land reported hearing infants crying at night. But no one ever saw those babies. Dinina swallowed hard, nausea rising. Why? She whispered. What does he want with them? Sarah shook her head helplessly. We don't know exactly, but we know the disappearances are deliberate. We know he chooses women no one will come looking for. And we know your price, 19 cents, was designed to deliver you straight into his hands. The truth hit like a physical blow. Elias hadn't simply wanted her gone. He had knowingly funneled her into the path of a predator who specialized in erasing women like her. Fear surged through Dinina, sharp enough to make her grip the edge of the table. Then why did Jacob stop him? She asked. Why intervene? Hannah exhaled slowly. Because someone finally noticed the pattern. She explained that news of Graves's suspicious purchases had traveled quietly among pockets of enslaved communities, whispers carried from plantation to plantation. Bethy, still working in the Cartwright home, had heard those whispers and recognized the danger when she learned of Dinina's planned sale. She reached out to contacts in the Underground Railroad, sending a message that a young, pregnant woman was being targeted. Jacob Brennan, using the name Jacob Marsh, was dispatched to intercept the auction. His bid had been reckless, nearly ruinous, but intentional. He had been prepared to outbid Graves at any cost. You were never meant to be left in Savannah, Hannah said. Your rescue began months ago. But rescue did not mean safety. Sarah folded Abigail's journal carefully. Graves will not let this go, she warned. Men like him do not forget humiliation, especially not publicly delivered. Dinina shivered, remembering the fury in Graves's eyes as Marsh outbid him. What happens if he finds me here? She asked. Then we all face consequences, Sarah said simply, which is why we move only when Jacob returns with a plan. Hannah poured Dinina warm tea and spoke softly. Graves has eyes across the county, riders who report suspicious movement, white men who will ask questions if they see a white traveler with a pregnant black woman. Running right now would be suicide. The logic was brutal, but true. Dinina felt trapped between danger behind her and danger ahead, but staying still for the moment was their only defense. That night, Dinina lay awake on the small bed, listening to the fire crackle softly. The journal's words replayed in her mind. Rachel, Margaret, unnamed women whose stories ended in silence. She imagined the hidden barn, the screams swallowed by darkness, the tiny cries abruptly cut short. and she realized with dawning horror that she had nearly become the next entry in that journal. She pressed her hands to her stomach, feeling her child shift beneath her palms. "We will not be taken," she whispered, a vow formed from fear and rage intertwined. She didn't know where Jacob would take her next or whether escape was truly possible, but she knew this much: she would fight to keep this baby alive. She would not vanish into the same abyss that had swallowed so many others. And whatever came next, she would face it awake, alert, and unbroken. Jacob returned at dawn on the fourth day, his horse drenched in sweat, his face drawn with exhaustion. Sarah knew instantly that something had shifted. He stepped inside, shut the door firmly, and spoke in a low voice. "Graves knows I'm not who I claimed." Hannah froze mid-stitch. Jacob drank from a tin cup before continuing. "He's been all over Savannah asking questions, showing my description, offering coin for information. He discovered no one named Jacob Marsh registered at any boarding house. He knows the name is false." Dinina's stomach coiled. "So what does he want?" Jacob's jaw tightened. "Answers. And when he can't find them, he'll start searching the roads and outlying settlements. Sooner or later he'll learn about this cabin." Sarah crossed her arms, absorbing the danger. "Then we don't have long." Jacob nodded. "Which means the plan has to change." Jacob sat at the table, leaning forward. "I cannot take you north myself. My face is already marked. Graves will hunt the man who bought you. If I travel with you, we'll be caught within days." Dinina felt panic rise. "Then how do I escape?" Jacob reached inside his coat and placed a small envelope on the table. "By sea." He explained that a merchant vessel would depart Savannah in 5 days, bound for Philadelphia. Its captain, a man named Samuel Porter, quietly supported the Underground Railroad. He had agreed to conceal Dinina in the ship's cargo hold, far from prying eyes. Once the vessel reached the port, a prominent conductor named Thomas Garrett would meet her and continue the journey north. "Garrett has moved hundreds of fugitives," Jacob said. "If anyone can get you to Canada alive, it's him." The route was dangerous, but safer than traveling overland with Graves's eyes everywhere. Dinina gripped the edge of the table, trying to steady her breathing. "But what about the baby?" she asked quietly. "What if something happens at sea?" Jacob spoke carefully. "Porter has assisted pregnant women before. He knows the risks. But I won't lie. Storms, illness, or discovery could put you in danger. It won't be easy." Dinina nodded slowly. Nothing in her life had ever been easy. "If I stay here, he'll find me," she said. "If I go with you, we'll be hunted. So this ship, it's my best chance." Jacob reached across the table and placed a cloth bundle in front of her. Inside was money, enough to begin a life once she reached freedom. Dinina shook her head. "I can't take this." "You must," Jacob insisted. "Your survival is the answer to everything Elias and Graves tried to destroy. Take it, use it." The next night, under the cover of darkness, Jacob prepared the wagon. He arranged crates and blankets so Dinina could hide among them, invisible to anyone who might glance inside. Sarah and Hannah embraced her fiercely, as though imprinting their strength into her bones. "Remember," Sarah whispered, "you are worth more than any price they ever put on you." Dinina swallowed hard, touched by their courage. Jacob urged her into the wagon, and they set off, moving slowly along side paths, avoiding any road where riders might be stationed. Every creak of the wheels felt like a risk, every distant lantern a threat. The journey took hours, each minute sharpened by the fear that Graves's men might emerge from the trees. Only when they reached the far edge of Savannah's port district did Jacob finally exhale. Near midnight, they reached a warehouse by the river. Captain Porter was waiting, an older man with weathered skin and a calm, steady presence. He scanned Dinina quickly, assessing her condition, then nodded. "We'll move fast," he said. "The watch rotates soon." He led them across the dock to his ship, a 3-masted vessel creaking softly in the tide. Below deck, he showed Dinina a narrow gap behind stacked crates, barely wide enough for one person to lie down. "This is where you stay," Porter said. "No sound, no movement when someone's near. I'll bring food when I can." Dinina felt her heart race as she stepped into the cramped darkness. Jacob looked at her one last time. "You're going to make it," he whispered. and your child will be born free." She wanted to believe him. With one final breath, she crawled into the hiding space. Porter slid the crates back, sealing her into blackness. Above her, the ship groaned as sailors prepared for departure. The tide began to shift. Dinina closed her eyes. Her fate was moving with the water now. The ship pulled away from Savannah at dawn. Dinina felt the shift in motion before she heard the muffled shouts of sailors above. The small space behind the crates was suffocatingly tight. She could not straighten her legs or lift her head fully. She lay curled on her side, arms pressed protectively around her stomach, listening to the creak of timber and the steady rush of water slapping the hull. Twice a day, as promised, Captain Porter came to her. He moved a crate just enough to pass in stale bread, dried meat, and a small tin cup of water. "No noise," he reminded her each time, "no matter what you hear." His footsteps would retreat, and the darkness would swallow her again. The first 2 days passed without event. The rocking of the ship was steady and, at times, almost soothing, until the storm came. On the third afternoon, thunder rolled in the distance. Soon the gentle rocking became violent lurches. Crates shifted, ropes snapped against beams. The ship groaned like a living creature in pain. Dinina pressed herself into the corner, fearing the cargo would collapse and crush her. Rain hammered the deck above, and the storm howled so fiercely she could no longer distinguish wind from waves. Hours blurred. Her body slammed against the wooden boards with each surge. The baby inside her twisted uneasily, responding to the chaos. At one point, Dinina closed her eyes and whispered a prayer she wasn't sure reached anyone. The storm raged through the night and into the next day. When it finally weakened, silence filled the hold. Heavy, unsettling silence. Porter did not come. Morning passed, then afternoon, then an entire night without food or water. Fear crept into every corner of Dinina's mind. Had the storm claimed him? Had someone discovered his secret? By the second day without supplies, dizziness gripped her. She tasted blood from cracked lips. The lack of water made her tongue feel like cloth. The child inside her moved weakly now, small flutters instead of the strong kicks she was used to. She whispered apologies into the darkness, begging the baby to hold on. On the third day, she began to believe she would die there, starved, alone, her body never found. Her story dissolved into the sea like so many others. Then, at last, footsteps approached. The crates shifted, and light sliced through the darkness, blinding her. A young sailor with red hair and sea-burned skin stared at her in shock. "Lord above," he breathed, "you're real." He lifted a canteen to her lips. "Sip slow," he warned. "You've been without water too long." Cool liquid touched her tongue, and the relief was overwhelming. When she finally managed to speak, her voice was barely a whisper. "Where is Captain Porter?" The sailor's expression hardened. "Dead, fell during the storm, broke his neck." Dinina's heart dropped. Porter had been her only link to safety. "Before he died," the sailor continued, "he told me where you were, told me to keep you hidden and alive." His name was Michael. "I'll finish what he started," he said. "We reach Wilmington tomorrow." True to his word, Michael returned twice more that day with food and water, checking the passageway carefully each time. When daylight faded the following afternoon, the ship slowed. Dinina heard voices from the docks, the clatter of unloading cargo, the change in rhythm that signaled arrival. Her heart raced. Was Thomas Garrett really here? Would she be smuggled out unnoticed? Hours stretched endlessly before Michael returned with another man. Older, calm, with eyes that seemed to see straight through fear. "You must be Dinina," he said gently. "I'm Thomas Garrett." He and Michael carried her up the ladder and into the cool Wilmington air. She blinked against the sunset, breathing free territory for the first time. "My wagon is waiting," Garrett said. "We travel tonight. You've come too far to fail now." Wrapped in blankets, weak but alive, Dinina climbed into the wagon. As it rolled away from the harbor, she looked back once at the ship that had nearly killed her and had saved her all the same. Garrett's wagon moved through Wilmington under cover of night, navigating quiet streets and narrow roads until they reached a modest farmhouse on the outskirts of town. Inside, a warm fire was lit and food waited on the table. Garrett's wife, Rachel, welcomed Dinina with gentle hands and a steady voice. For the first time in weeks, Dinina slept in a real bed. At dawn, they began moving north, sometimes by wagon, sometimes on foot, often under moonlight. Safe houses dotted the route across Pennsylvania and onward through New York. In one home lived a Quaker family who gave her clean clothes and sturdy boots. In another, she met Frederick Douglass himself. He listened to her story with fierce attention and urged her to document everything once she reached safety. "Testimony is a torch," he told her. "Shine it where others try to hide the truth." His words stayed with her as they crossed into increasingly colder territory. 7 weeks passed before Dinina reached the Canadian border. The ground was frozen solid, and her breath puffed white in the night air. She crossed into Ontario with Garrett at her side, each step carrying the weight of generations behind her. When she realized no law could drag her back to bondage, her knees buckled. Garrett caught her, steadying her as tears streamed down her face. "You are free now," he whispered. They walked the final distance to a settlement called Dawn, a community built by formerly enslaved families. The residents welcomed her with blankets, hot stew, and the kind of tenderness she had rarely known. 3 weeks later, during a bitter February storm, Dinina gave birth to a son. The labor was long and agonizing, but when the baby finally cried, she felt a surge of strength. She named him Jacob, honoring the man who saved her life at an auction where she had been declared worth less than a cup of coffee. Life in Dawn brought healing, though scars remained. Dinina worked as a seamstress and helped others arriving from the United States, guiding them toward new freedoms. As she learned to read and write more fluently, she began recording her experiences in a journal, each page a refusal to let the past be buried. In 1853, she married a blacksmith named Samuel Richards, a gentleman who had also escaped bondage. Together they built a family, raising Jacob and 2 daughters. But even as joy filled her home, a piece of her heart stayed anchored in Charleston. Ruth, her first child, remained lost. Dinina wrote letter after letter to abolitionist networks across the South, searching for any trace. Years passed with no word. Then, in 1856, a missionary from South Carolina contacted her. He had found a girl on a nearby farm who matched Ruth's description. She remembered her mother. She remembered being taken away. Despite the enormous danger, Dinina resolved to go back for her daughter. With the help of 2 experienced conductors, she traveled south disguised and cautious, moving through the same underground routes that once carried her to freedom. In early September, under a moonless sky, they reached the farm where Ruth lived. The girl, now 13, stared at Dinina with wide eyes when she was gently awakened. "Do I know you?" she whispered. Dinina's voice broke. "I'm your mother. I came back." Ruth began to cry, and so did she, but time was scarce. They left before dawn, retracing the secret pathways north. The journey was long, but safer than Dinina had feared. When they crossed back into Canada in October, Ruth clung to her hand, refusing to let go. For the first time since the age of 4, she was with family again. And this time, no one could steal her away. The years that followed were full, a life rebuilt from ashes. Dinina continued her journal, chronicling her escape, the horrors she witnessed, the courage of those who helped her, and the unvarnished truth of slavery's violence. She lived until 1891, passing away surrounded by her children and grandchildren. Her writings, discovered after her death, served as a testament. "I was sold for 19 cents, but I was never worthless." Her story, like those of millions, revealed a nation that once sanctioned unspeakable cruelty, yet also held brave souls willing to resist. The atrocities of men like Thornton Graves eventually surfaced when Union troops uncovered the hidden graves on his plantation in 1863, though justice never reached him. Still, Dinina's survival, her freedom, and her legacy stood as a defiance stronger than any verdict. In the end, she carried forward not just her own life, but the lives of all those who were silenced. And in telling her story, we refuse to let their memory disappear.